just instruments of your peace. Walls of pride and prejudice shall cease when we are your instruments of peace.
Good evening.
Good evening.
It's good to see each and every one of you that have returned this evening to hear a portion of God's will, to hear something that will benefit us and allow us to make healthy decisions on a day-by-day basis. The subject that I want to broach with you is a kind of a carry-on or a tag-on to what Brother read and addressed this morning. It's important because it's a crisis that the church is dealing with, whether we realize it or not. Astronaut Jim Lovell said on the Apollo 13 mission, he said when the fuel tanks exploded on their spacecraft, he says, "Houston, we have a problem." I'm here to tell you this afternoon that church, we have a problem. We have a problem because our Esau's are struggling to recognize the value in their birthright. And so what I want to do is kind of refer you to a passage of Scripture and see if I can make application to how important it is to know your birthright, who you are and what you are about, because that is so meaningful in your life. And to the extent that we can help our youth understand and appreciate that, we save a church, we save a people, we save a nation. So turn, if you will, to Genesis, the 25th chapter, and we'll look briefly at this passage of Scripture. The message I'm entitling, Why Esau Despised His Birthright. Why Esau despised his birthright. Verse 29 of Genesis 25 says this, Now Jacob cooked stew, and Esau came in from the field, and he was weary. And Esau said to Jacob, Please feed me with that same red stew, for I am weary. Therefore his name was called Edom. But Jacob said, Sell me your birthright as of this day. And Esau said, Look, I'm about to die. So what is this birthright to me? And Jacob said, Swear to me as of this day. So he swore to him. Here's a play on the Hebrew. I want you to pick this up. And sold his birthright to Jacob. And the other part of that play on the Hebrew is the 34th verse. It says, Jacob gave Esau bread and stew of lentils. And he ate, and he drank, and he arose, and he went his way. Thus Esau despised his birthright. A couple of things you need to pick up on in here. There is value that was transferred, but only one understood the value. There was a loss that occurred here, and the significance of that loss affected generations beyond Esau. generations beyond the deciding point. There was a failure to appreciate the value. Because when Jacob, and Esau should have seen this coming. If you will allow me just a minute to kind of divert. Jacob's nickname was the supplanter. Okay. Jacob was a trickster. Jacob was a master, a Shylock, if you will. Okay. And so Esau should have seen this coming. But he was overwhelmed by his hunger. He was overwhelmed by his sense of what was important right then. He was overwhelmed with his own personal need, and he couldn't see beyond himself, his immediate gratification, and he could not see eternity. But Jacob knew exactly what he was asking for. And he said to him, "Sell me your birthright." And because Esau kind of thought it was trivial and thought a decision made here was inconsequential, he said, "So what is this birthright to me? What value, what significance? I'm trying to get an immediate need, an immediate desire, an immediate hunger satisfied." And so he sold. You only sell those things that have value. I've got some garbage at my house, but Brother Curry, I can't entice you to come buy my garbage, can I? As a matter of fact, he looked at me real funny just making that proposal. Okay? That brother's lost his mind. So in the transaction that occurred, Esau sold. He transferred value. And Jacob gave. You can give away just about anything. Most things I give away, now, I have to be careful how I say this, but most things I give away, I've already decided I don't want it. I don't need it. It's not important. So one person in this transaction got value, got wealth, got eternity, if you will, in terms of the promises of God. I'm going to say something in a moment, and for those of you who are scholars, I recognize that what I'm about to say is going to brush up a little bit against Romans, the 9th chapter and the 13th verse, but bear with me. How many times have you seen the phrase in Scripture, Abraham, Isaac, and Esau? How many times have you seen that phrase in Scripture? Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. No. You know why you haven't seen that? Because Esau sold his birthright. And so in Exodus, the 6th chapter, in the 3rd verse, God walks to Moses, or comes to Moses and says, "I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." In the 6th chapter and the 8th verse, he says, "I'll bring you to a land that I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." He swore that none of the men who came up out of Egypt in Numbers, the 32nd chapter, will from 20 years old shall see the land that I promised to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says that he may establish you today as his people, Moses, to the children of Israel, that he may be your God as he promised you when he swore to Abraham, Isaac, And I put to you that in birth order, in rights within Jewish society, and not only Jewish society, but many of the societies around at that time, that it should have been Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. But because Esau despised his birthright, he gave away innumerable value, incalculable honor and position for generations. That's why I say to you this evening that the church has a problem. What Esau thought was trivial and inconsequential was the most important decision of his life. And within his birthrights were all the perks of the firstborn. Look at Genesis, the 49th chapter and verse 3. Jacob to Reuben says this, Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity and the excellency of power. This is because you are my firstborn. Now, we know Reuben had some problems and that Jacob had to deal with, but here I'm trying to get you to understand that in the status of the birthright of the firstborn was excellency of power, excellency of dignity, the might of the family, the right of the family, and the head of the family. Jacob says, you're the beginning of my strength. I've got 2 children, and I love my daughter dearly, and she knows that. But Adrian's my firstborn. And so I look at him with a certain kind of an expectation of who he is and who he stands for and what it's all about because of where he was born and how he was born. The point I'm trying to make is that sometimes our youth, I call them today, our Esau's, don't see the power and the excellency and the glory and the honor in being a part of God's firstborn. And see, when you don't see that, when you don't understand that, then it's easy for you to walk away from those things that are powerful, those things that are significant, those things that should have value and meaning in your life. The firstborn was dedicated to God. Exodus, the 22nd chapter and the 29th verse. Genesis 43 and 33, Joseph set all of his brothers in birthright order. There was something to being the firstborn and to honoring the birthright. And the person who had the birthright had a double portion of all that his father had. He's the beginning of his strength, and the right of the firstborn is to him. And so the sad epitaph of this story is that whatever advantages Esau enjoyed as the firstborn, he now is invited to sell for a bowl of lentil. I don't know how many of you know what lentil is, but if you just think of a brown split pea, and you've got pretty much lentils there. Okay. Now, I've painted in your mind the value of the birthright, the value of something that should be worth holding on to, because we want our youth to understand and appreciate that being in the church, that being a part of God's family, is just as valuable. And there are things out there that are competing for your attention. There are things out there that are competing for your time, that are distracting you. And sometimes we run the risk, our youth run the risk of making decisions on the basis of what's right now, on the basis of what's immediate gratification, on the basis of what everybody else is doing. And so, while the reason I say to us that we have a problem is because not many of our homes and churches and communities are doing enough to stave off the relentless enticement of our youth. I'm not a farm boy, but I grew up around a lot of farmers. And I remember as a child, this one family that we would go and visit, they had chickens. And the chickens, on occasion, had chicks. And there's nothing more attractive to a little child than a little chick running around going chirp, 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 chirp. And the first thing you want to do is pick it up and pet it. That's when you discover the danger of a mother hen. That's when you find out that feathers in your face will make anybody run. I have yet to see anything that a mother hen is afraid of when their children are at stake. And we need to be mother hens around our youth, because they are not only the church of tomorrow, but we need to get them to understand that they're the church of today. And that today is important, and decisions you make today affect your tomorrow. We want you to be here, to be loved, to be protected, so that the decisions that you make today will get you to tomorrow. Let me show you some things that our youth are. Please hear me right. I'm not saying that us old heads, okay, don't have challenges and difficulties, okay? But some of the things that our youth are dealing with are powers of order of magnitude greater than the kinds of things we've dealt with. The proliferation of pornographic material is everywhere. And AI is making it even worse, because now you can design your own sin. Shifting attitudes of sexuality now present themselves to our youth, and it says, forget how you were born and what you were born as. I can be cisgender if I want to be. I can be pansexual if I want to be. I can be queer. I can be polysexual. I can be bisexual. And these things are offered as alternatives. And too many times our churches and our homes are afraid to have the candid discussions that we ought to have with the youth to arm them against some of the decisions that they are having to that they are being forced to make on a day-by-day basis. The joke about parent and the talk about the birds and the bees of most folks is by the time the parent decided to get around to have the discussion, the child was in graduate school. Social media and all the ills, as well as its benefits, presents new challenges to youth. And church folks, we need to be able at least to talk about it. We're afraid to talk. It's about time that us old heads stop being embarrassed about these discussions and tell them the truth and tell them what they need to, and arm them so that they can make the appropriate decision. Because there are too many children in the world today because a child didn't know how to make a decision. And then there's predation. Last week, a man from Nebraska was arrested because he drove 1,500 miles from Nebraska to Florida to abduct two sisters, 12 and 15 years old. Anybody hear about that? Predation occurs because a child doesn't know when they are in danger. And anybody can be on the other side of that computer. And sometimes when we sit down, so listen to me, that means we as parents, we as Christians, we as older men and women in the church, we need to educate ourselves as to how these things are happening so that we can help someone. Because I'm going to another point in just a moment that Brother Red mentioned this morning about how we can be available to the youth and those who are struggling to make decisions, lifetime decisions, that in a moment of satisfaction, in a moment of situational hunger, can carry into a lifetime. Okay? And I'm tired of us, old heads, I'm a little hard on us, sitting back and allowing that to happen because I'm embarrassed about having a conversation with a young man or a young lady that needs to have that conversation. Social and moral values are no longer coming from the home alone. Peers, colleagues, friends, media content providers present values to our youth ranging from clothing styles to food to lifestyle. The Kardashians are rich simply because they went on television and said, this is how you dress. This is what you wear. This is how you're going to look. This is what this smells like. And I could go on and on and on. But let me share with you the impact of a world on the church that doesn't protect its youth. In 2016, there was a book written entitled You Lost Me. I was talking to Brother Red about that not too long ago. And they published a report that said 59% of young adults with a Christian background, this is not the unchurched Christians, these are, and I'm using church in a generic kind of a sense, so keep in mind with that, all right? But with a Christian background, 59% of those individuals who grew up in church have walked away from the church. Many for just a while, but too many others for good. A few years later, 2019, another book was written, and it was entitled Faith for Exiles, 5 Ways for a New Generation to Follow Jesus in Digital Babylon. And it says that now we've gone from 59% to 64%. Nearly 2/3 of 18 to 29-year-olds who grew up in the church tells the Barna Group that they have withdrawn from the church involvement as an adult after having been actively involved as a child. That's a sobering statistic. That means that if I ask 10 young people to stand up, I say to 3 of them, sit down, and the other 7 to leave. Are you willing to accept those odds? Is there a single child or youth in our presence that we are not willing to stand in the gap for? Standing in the gap means being an example. Standing in the gap means providing advice. Standing in the gap means living in front of that child, that youth, that person, the kind of Christian life that we ought to live. I want to offer you 3 points in terms of how to resolve this or how to deal with this. Here's some options that I want you to consider. Undergirding all these 3 points is this idea that we need to cultivate, listen to me, we need to cultivate intergenerational relationships. Okay? That's the most important way and effective way that faith communities can develop and flourish their youth, by encouraging intergenerational relationships. In other words, there should not be any more we and them. It should all be us. We are a part of this. Here are the 3 things I want us to leave in your mind and give you some pause to think about. 1, and this comes from a study of youth and religion that suggests what we can do to hold on to our youth. And I'll give you some biblical examples of this. First of all, faith must be practiced at home. It must be active. Don't send your children to church, take them. Okay? Practice it at home. Brother Ed referred to Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter this morning. And I'll read a few verses there that says, "And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you will talk of them." Listen to what the author says. Talk to them. Talk to them. Talk not at, but to them. Give pause and give opportunity for questions. And I'm going to tell you something. If you get the trust and confidence of a younger person, whether it's 6 or 26, if you get their confidence and you get their trust, they'll ask you anything. So I say this with a caution. Before you hang your shingle, make sure you're ready for the question. But I'm going to encourage you to hang your shingle, because the Bible example is that old men teach young men, and older women teach younger women. Young men need examples. They need us old heads. Brother Red and I had this ongoing argument about who's the oldest. We're so close to one another that it's a photo finish. Okay? He wins, but just our hair, okay? Okay? But we need to put ourselves out there for our youth. Look at the young men and the young ladies we have. And here's my definition of young, in case some of you are wondering. I'm saying young in terms of 6 to 29. I can say that. I'm an old head. Okay? But put yourself out there. Be examples for them. Teach them, talk to them, be candid with them. I try my very best. If I see a young man doing something godly, doing something that he needs encouragement about, that she needs encouragement about, I'm the first to say, good job. Even if you think they can do it better, tell them, good job. And if you think they can do it better, offer them some advice. But tell them, good job. That's what talking it about, not telling. We even parents need to understand that our job is not so much to tell as it is to educate. I like what Paul said to Timothy. Paul says that he greatly desires to see Timothy, and he's mindful of your tears. This is 2 Timothy 1:4, that I may be filled with joy when I call to remembrance the genuine faith that's in you. Paul's talking about the faith that he saw in Timothy. He says, I bring this to memory, and this faith dwelt first in your grandmother. Then it was in your mother. And I am confident that it's in you. That's intergenerational. Okay? That's spreading the wealth through 3 generations. And within the families, we need to practice what we preach. I say this with a bit of reservation. This is point 2. And the reason I say this is because you have to watch the youth like mother hens, because there are predators out there. Okay? But we have a biblical example for Christian mentorship. And so we need to encourage, we need to be a part of Christian mentorship outside the family. Okay? That practices religion faithfully. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. When I was a young man, about age 12, my dad knew I was going to preach. And so he would, when school was out, he would send me to Corinth, Mississippi, where the brother John Rock was a minister there. And I would spend the summer with him. And he would teach me to preach. He would teach me techniques. He would teach me memorization. Okay? There are visitations that are going on right now in this congregation. And yesterday at our leadership meeting, we had a couple of reports being read, and one of the directors or one of the leads on the visitation committee talked about taking the youth with them to visit those who were sick. Okay? They need to see it in your life. You need to encourage it. We need to encourage them and be there for them. Mentors that you see in Scripture, Moses and Joshua. Okay? Elijah and Elisha. Other mentors, Eli and Samuel, Paul and Timothy. And who could be a better mentor than Jesus and the 12 that he taught while he was on this earth? So the first one is faith practice at home. The second one is Christian mentorship outside the family. Pick someone. Pick someone that you have confidence in. I'm not saying just throw your child willy-nilly or put somebody willy-nilly in front of someone, but someone you have confidence in, someone who has demonstrated that moral background and backbone and spiritual strength. And then the third point is that Christian experience, and Brother Red talked about that this morning. You and I and our youth must have a personal experience with God. That's what's going to give you a sense of your identity more than anything else. Do you remember Jesus and his temptation in the wilderness? Look at each one of those temptations. Satan comes to Jesus and he makes this phrase, if thou be. If thou be. He's seeing whether or not Jesus understands who he is and his identity. And so he says to him, if you are who you are supposed to be, we need to give our youth the power and the experience and encourage them to develop their own sense of a relationship with God. Everything Jesus was tempted by. In the wilderness, he responded, "It is written." We need to give our youth the same kind of power, the same kind of ability to respond, so that when they are in front of their peers, when they are the example that others are looking at, when they are in a place that no one knows who they are, when they can be in Vegas, they say to themselves, "Still, it is written." If a young person experiences all three of these relationships in their childhood, and especially in their early teen years, they are far less likely to drift away from their family's faith tradition as they transition into emerging adulthood. That's a finding from the Berner Group, who looked at children, who looked at young adults, who looked at young parents, and made this and answered surveys with respect to their lives. And it sort of echoes the proverb that we see in the 22nd proverb, right? Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Esau despised his birthright because he didn't really know what he had. He didn't know how to appreciate it. Give our youth the ability, the understanding, the wherewithal, so that they know what they have and will not compromise themselves. There's another part of the study I'd like to go over with you, but we don't have the time. We need to do a series of studies on this. In the two studies that I reported, there were surveys given to youth to respond on why they left. And so we get to hear from the youth why they left. And I'm going to tell you, it's kind of hard to hear some of the things that they say, because we recognize some truth in what they say. For instance, someone being a leader but not in life, only in talk. There's a challenge also that the youth must understand, that the church cannot compromise on things like purity. The church can't compromise. And so there has to be an understanding that those things are birthright issues that you can't dissuade, that you can't devalue, that you can't ignore. Perhaps we'll have the opportunity to do a workshop where we can answer some hard questions from the youth, because that's how we ultimately protect them from decisions that Esau made. My thoughts to you tonight. If there's any here that are subject to the gospel call, we'll give you the opportunity to come, to state whatever your need, your desire is. And we'll see if the church can respond to your request. Won't you come while we stand and we sing the song of invitation?
Bring Christ your